Welcome back to the K-High Afternoon News. Good afternoon, AMKC Freela. Pleased to be joined by Congressman Tom McClintock. Tom, I want to start with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and kind of the fallout since then as far as the debate over whether they should go about installing a new justice before the presidential election. President Trump tweeting out yesterday that he will be announcing his Supreme Court nominee on Saturday. You're a big studier or historian of the Constitution. Can you just kind of explain legally what the process is rather than, people's opinions about it? Like, how should it go?
Well, it's not particularly complicated. The president nominates the members of the Supreme Court, and the Senate has the prerogative to advise and consent to them or not as it feels fit.
Obviously the media is playing it out one way depending on which network you watch. Do you think that, obviously he has the right to do so. The Senate has the right to vote on it. Do you think that this will be something that is a possibility before we get 6 weeks from today to Election Day?
Oh, I think so. It's been made pretty clear by the Senate leadership. They believe they have the votes for the top people that Trump is expected to choose from, and again, that is how our Constitution operates. It's not altogether complicated. I think it was confused up quite a bit during the Merrick Garland nomination by Obama. It has nothing to do with the proximity of a nomination to the election. Many presidents have nominated Supreme Court justices. In fact, I think all of them have when they've fallen vacant during an election year. That's not the issue. The issue is it is the president's prerogative and responsibility to nominate, and it is the Senate's prerogative and responsibility to either act or not act on a nomination as it sees fit. So there's nothing, there shouldn't be anything confusing about that. When Barack Obama made his nomination in 2016, the Senate believed that it was not fit to act on that at that time. The Senate believes that it is now. That's the Senate's judgment.
Well, and one last point on this, just listening to different pundits talk about it, somebody brought up a great point saying, the Democrats make it appear like they want to wait until the next president is going to be in there as if Joe Biden was going to win. But when people voted for President Trump back in 2016, that should have been on their minds as well. The fact that we could lose a Supreme Court justice. And at that point, that's the person that you put in charge to make this election.
Well, that's the great irony of all of this. I'm told that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was urged to resign at the end of the Obama administration so that Obama would be certain to be able to make a nomination. She declined to do that, expecting Hillary Clinton to be elected. Well, the voters had something else in mind, and so here we are. But the Constitution is very clear on this. The Senate has every right to act as it sees fit once the president sends them a nomination.
And let me direct the listeners over to your website, mcclintock.house.gov, talking about an article on there today, Our Forest Tragedy, and it recaps some of the topics that you and I have discussed for many years, unfortunately, without any change here in California. But if we could just kind of talk a little bit about some of the highlights. And I want to talk more about Governor Newsom later in our conversation because he dropped a bombshell earlier. But as far as what you point to the fact that he's saying he's trying to make a very complex situation seem so simple that if we just ride our bikes and, turn up our thermostats, everything's going to be okay. And as you pointed out countless times, that is completely inaccurate. And there is so much more that has to be done and can be done and could actually benefit us economically here in the state.
Yeah, and this business of using climate change as an excuse for inaction, I find just absolutely appalling. This is not climate change. The climate's been changing for millennia, but this problem has persisted in California down through the ages. Paleontologists tell us before Western civilization arrived, we lost between 4 and 12 million acres a year to catastrophic fire in California. When Juan Cabrillo dropped anchor in the Santa Monica Bay, it was the height of the Santa Ana fire season of 1514. He promptly named the Santa Monica Bay the Bay of Smoke because of the catastrophic fires that were raging then. That's how nature manages a forest. That's how nature manages lands. In an untended forest is just like an untended garden. It will grow and grow and grow until it chokes itself to death. It will then fall victim to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately be consumed by catastrophic wildfire. That's how nature gardens, and she's a lousy gardener. We set up the Forest Service 100 years ago to break that cycle so that we could protect our forests so they could be enjoyed by every generation. And we employed modern scientific forest management practices, and that included logging. We had sent foresters into the forest. They marked off surplus timber. We then auctioned off that timber, and logging companies paid the federal government to remove that excess timber. 25% of those funds went right into our local governments like Auburn. The other 75% went to the Forest Service. We had healthy forests, and we had a thriving local economy. It was the environmental laws in the 1970s that made modern land management endlessly time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. The costs of these environmental reviews are now so huge and take so long that they consume the entire value of the timber that would otherwise be auctioned off. It actually now costs us money to remove excess timber. Meanwhile, in fact, I was having this conversation at the Creek Fire Command Center just a week ago when I visited with some of the foresters there who were complaining. They used to be able to do prescribed burns. Now the environmental requirements are so huge that it's almost impossible to do those prescribed burns. They used to be able to use herbicides to suppress brush growth. That's now impossible under these laws. And we've basically allowed nature to revert to its normal condition, which is what we're now seeing envelop us. The Forest Service reduced, and modern land management reduced our fire losses from 4 to 12 million acres a year before Western civilization arrived. We only lost about 250,000 acres a year to catastrophic fire during most of the 20th century because we practiced these land management principles. When the laws made that impossible, now, just this year we've lost well over 3 million acres. So that's as I said, that's not a new normal. That is the old normal reasserting itself because we abandoned our public lands. And those that say, well, climate change plays a role. You take a look at the boundary lines between the private forests that are not hobbled by these laws and the public forests that are. You can tell where the boundary line is between the private forest and the public forest just by the condition of the forest on each side of that boundary. How clever of the climate to know exactly where those boundaries are and only to decimate the public lands. I was just having a conversation with a fellow from Georgia. Virtually all of their forests are privately owned. They're well maintained, and guess what? They've got the same, they're part of the same planet as we are. They don't have this problem. Why? Because their lands are properly managed.
No, absolutely. And just another point on what you talked about with the forest tragedy, the reduction in sawmills from 1980, you said from 149 to 27, economic devastation, environmental devastation, all things that I just don't think people are always aware. So I'm glad you point these things out because think about the amount of money that we could be generating into our local economies, and I don't even know where we go from here. Is there a way?
Our schools.
Yeah, in our schools.
The revenues from the federal timber auctions, like as I said, a quarter of those went directly into our local communities. They went to finance our schools. That's on top of the enormous economic activity that they generated for our mountain communities. So people were prospering, and a steady stream of revenues was pouring into local coffers to pay for things like good schools. When these laws were imposed, those revenues stopped. Now we have several programs like PILT in lieu of property taxes. The Secure Rural Schools, which is basically welfare checks we write to our school districts to try to compensate for a fraction of the money that they lost when we stopped timber harvesting. And every year our rural schools have to go begging to Congress to get another appropriation from the Secure Rural Schools Act. This was not necessary when we were properly managing our forests. We didn't have these intense and catastrophic fires, and we had ample revenues going to our schools and a thriving local economy. The environmental left destroyed all of that along with our forests.
We're visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KI. Tom, I can't let you go today until we talk about the news that broke just a couple of hours ago. California will outlaw sales of new gasoline-powered passenger cars and trucks by 2035, according to Governor Newsom. a move that he says will cut greenhouse gas emissions by 35% in the nation's most populous state. I mean, I can already hear you laughing. I laughed when I saw it as well. I mean, it's hard to even process. It is such a dumb idea. I want to hear your thoughts.
Not only that, but think about this. Look at the air that we've been breathing for the last month now.
Yes.
These fires make a mockery out of all of the draconian measures that people like Newsom have imposed on our communities in the name of reducing carbon dioxide emissions to stop global warming. Well, the planet's been warming and cooling for 4.5 billion years. I think it's a pretty safe bet it's going to continue to warm and cool regardless of what we do to our local economies as well as to the standard of living and quality of life of Californians. But this is particularly ludicrous. First of all, he can't do that by executive order.
Right.
That's what happens in dictatorships. This is not a dictatorship yet. My guess is it'll be challenged in court. Even so, you notice it won't go into effect until 2035 when he's safely out of this. This is empty virtue signaling by an empty-headed man that we've elected as governor, and I'm just wondering how long people are going to tolerate this nonsense before they rise up in revolt.
It's a great question. I also saw a couple of people somewhere on social media, but they brought up an interesting point. We can't even keep our electricity on our California power grid. And do we really think that we have the ability to put charging stations all over this state when we can't even keep the power on 365 days a year? Where's all the power going to come from to power the vehicles?
Yeah, not to mention the high-speed rail that's entirely electric.
Yeah, it's that one is just it's baffling. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
No, the stupidity is absolutely breathtaking, and the question is, when are the people of California going to wake up and realize that this golden state of ours, this beautiful state, that used to boast of the finest highway system in the world, the finest public school system in the country. We had certainly the finest university system in the country. We had electricity and water that were so abundant and so cheap that many communities didn't bother to measure the stuff. I mean, we always ran well under the national unemployment rate. That's the only thing that has changed in that beautiful state was public policy and the people who created that policy. And the left seized control of our state, and they've utterly destroyed the quality of living for the people of California. And why people are willing to put up with that, maybe they just don't remember what this was like when the state was well governed. But they can move to a free state where criminals are actually punished, where electricity and water are still very inexpensive, where housing is affordable for every income level. They can move to a free state and see what California once was like. But I've got a better idea. Why don't we take back California and restore it to the prosperity that we had under conservative governors?
Yeah, and last point on that, folks listening, on the heels of National Voter Registration Day yesterday, again, you can register to vote by going to registertovote.ca.gov and get your voice heard, before it's too late here in the state. We've been visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KI. Tom, a lot of topics, a lot of things going on. I know it's been a busy day. Thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure, Casey. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll take a quick break and be right back here on KI. Welcome back to the KI Afternoon News. Good afternoon.